The night of the crash, the drunken chase, and the crash at the driveway. How a petty grudge between Justin Sherman and Jonathan Schiller exploded in Judge Judy's courtroom. The courtroom was already quiet when Judge Judy looked down at the two young men in front of her. But the silence did not feel calm. It felt sharp, tense, and heavy, as if the room already knew that this was not just a simple case about a damaged car. This was a story about pride, drinking, old anger, bad choices, and the kind of foolishness that grows bigger in the dark after midnight. At one table sat Justin Sherman, a college student who claimed that after a night of drinking, his former friend Jonathan Schiller had deliberately rammed his car. At the other table sat Jonathan Schiller, who denied causing the damage and insisted that Justin was no innocent victim at all. According to him, this fight had started long before that night, and it had started because Justin, drunk on an earlier occasion, had vomited on his carpet and then refused to pay for the cleaning. That old insult, that old mess, that old refusal to take responsibility had not disappeared. It had stayed alive, growing quietly under the surface like a hot coal waiting for wind. The moment Judge Judy began asking questions, it became clear that this case was not really about one dent, one driveway, or one estimate from a repair shop. It was about what happens when young men mix alcohol with pride and then act as if consequences are for somebody else. Judge Judy had heard enough stories in her courtroom to know where this one was headed, and with the dry, cutting honesty that made people fear her and respect her at the same time, she moved right to what she called her favorite part of the case, the drinking. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were already warning them both that she was not in the mood for excuses. She asked Justin Sherman when this incident had happened, and he said it was around 1 in the morning on March 25th, 2005. It was late, the kind of hour when good judgment usually gets weaker and stupid ideas start to sound brave. She asked what day of the week it was, and after some hesitation it became clear it was a weekend night, which meant no one had school or work the next morning to force them into being responsible. Justin explained that he went to Longview Community College, and from there the story slowly opened into a picture that was both ordinary and disturbing. A high school party in a rural area, around 50 or 55 teenagers packed into a house. Parents nowhere in sight, alcohol flowing, common sense gone. Judge Judy, with her usual blunt humor, spoke about how parents of teenage children should never go away and joked that if they wanted peace, they should either take the children with them or lock them up somewhere safe. Because unsupervised teenagers and alcohol were almost always a recipe for disaster. It was funny in the way Judge Judy often was, but underneath the joke was a serious truth. Everyone in that courtroom understood it. The house had become a place where trouble was almost guaranteed. Justin Sherman said he had gone there with his witness, Sean, and though he tried to present himself as someone who simply showed up to socialize, the details made the night sound increasingly reckless. He said he started the evening at the party and had not brought any alcohol, but as the questions continued, the larger atmosphere of the place was impossible to ignore. There were teenagers drinking, older college-aged men mixing in, and the whole event had the loose, careless energy of something that felt exciting in the moment, but dangerous when looked at in daylight. Then Judge Judy turned to Sean, briefly questioning him, and the picture became even messier. Sean admitted he and Justin had gone together, that there had been a lot of drinking, and that he himself had brought a 12-pack of Miller Lite. When Judge Judy asked if the 12 beers were just for him, he said yes. That answer alone painted more than he probably meant it to. It showed a night built around drinking, not just around hanging out. It showed the kind of casual overdrinking that people often laugh off while they are young, only to discover later that the laughs fade faster than the damage. The judge asked how they even knew about the party, and the answer was as loose and careless as the night itself. Calls from friends, vague directions, the usual chain of teenage gossip and excitement. Somebody says there is a party, people pass the message, and everybody goes. No one asks whether it is safe. No one asks whether there will be adults. No one asks whether trouble is waiting there. They just go. That is how nights like this begin. They do not begin with the intention to end in police reports, damaged cars, broken friendships, and courtroom arguments. They begin with a phone call, some fear, a little boredom, and the belief that nothing serious will happen. But serious things often begin in exactly that way. Justin Sherman said that while he was at the party, he saw Jonathan Schiller there with his friends. The two had once been friendly, but whatever friendship had existed between them had clearly been poisoned by the earlier carpet incident. As Justin told it, Jonathan and his friends looked at him, laughed, made faces at him, and even made fake puking gestures in his direction. That image hung in the courtroom with a strange mix of teenage cruelty and childish mockery. It was not physical violence, but it was humiliating. It was public. It was meant to remind Justin of the night he had gotten sick and disgraced himself. When Judge Judy asked him directly whether he had, in fact, vomited on Jonathan Schiller's carpet months earlier, Justin admitted that he had. That moment was important because it broke the clean victim story he seemed to want. Yes, he was now complaining that his car had been damaged, but he was also part of a chain of ugly behavior that had started before this night. He had gotten drunk before. He had created a mess before. He had not handled it properly. According to Justin, Jonathan had refused his help that night and told him to get out, then later called and asked him to pay for the carpet cleaning. Justin admitted that when that call came a week later, he had refused to pay. That refusal sat heavily over everything that followed. It was not legal permission for revenge, of course, but it was a clue to the bitterness between the two men. An unpaid carpet cleaning bill had become more than money. It had become an insult, a story both men were still telling themselves, each one believing the other was more wrong, more reckless, more dishonest. That is how grudges work. They are rarely about the original event for very long. They become about respect, ego, and the need to feel that the other person will not get away with something. Justin then moved the story to the end of the party. He said he arrived around 9:30 and left around 12:30 or a quarter to 1. During those hours, the party grew louder, the drinking grew heavier, and the atmosphere more foolish. He claimed he himself had not been drinking that night, and Judge Judy, skeptical and sharp as always, pressed him on that point with the kind of tone that suggested she did not find the story especially impressive, even if true. After all, even if he had not consumed alcohol that night, he had still willingly placed himself in the center of a drunken mess among teenagers and overgrown boys behaving badly. He said he left because he was tired of it. But as he walked out to his car, he claimed Jonathan Schiller and his friends, drunk and loud, ran in front of him and began pushing his car toward a ditch. That image changed the story from mocking to menace. A man can laugh at another man at a party and still say it was stupid but harmless. But running in front of his car, pushing it toward danger, blocking his path, that was different. That suggested a group mentality, drunken courage, the ugly boldness that appears when people stop seeing consequences. Justin said he got into the car, told Sean to get in, started the engine, and drove away. He said Jonathan and his friends got into a Chevy Blazer and followed him, yelling from the windows, flashing headlights, honking, tapping his vehicle on the road, acting, in Judge Judy's perfect summary, stupid. That single word said everything. Not criminal masterminds. Not misunderstood young men. Stupid. Dangerous because of their stupidity, but still stupid. The kind of stupidity that kills people on highways, the kind that ruins families, the kind that later sits in court trying to explain itself in a voice full of excuses. According to Justin, the chase did not stop until he reached his own house. He stepped onto his front porch, and the other vehicle came right up behind him. They honked the horn, shouted threats, and said they wanted to fight. He told them to leave. Then he claimed Jonathan Schiller revved the engine and slammed into the back of his car before driving away. He described himself as shocked afterward, so shaken that he called the police. He brought a police report, photographs of the damage, and a repair estimate. On the surface, that made him look prepared, organized, and credible. He had documents. He had pictures. He had the report. But Judge Judy never lets paper alone decide a case. She watches behavior. She listens to the spaces between words. She measures people by how they react when they are not being praised. And she was already seeing enough in Justin Sherman to know that, no matter what happened to his car, he was not blameless in the larger story of his own life. Then it was Jonathan Schiller's turn. He began where he most wanted the story to begin, not with the damaged car, but with the earlier incident at his house, the night Justin got drunk, vomited on his carpet, caused trouble, and refused responsibility. To Jonathan, that history mattered deeply. He described Justin as someone with a drinking problem, someone who blacked out, someone who became aggressive. He claimed that during the earlier incident, Justin tried to fight him in his own house. He described letting him pass out on the ground. His voice carried the frustration of someone who believed he had been forced to deal with a chaotic, irresponsible person and was now unfairly being dragged into court as if the roles were simple and clean. But Judge Judy was not interested in letting him hide behind old grievances. She heard him call Justin an alcoholic and had one of those sharp Judge Judy moments that cut right through the noise. She turned back to Justin and said, in substance, that she had a nose, and that if she could tell at 19 that he drank too much, then by 30 his life would be over if he did not stop. It was a brutal thing to hear in public, but it was also the kind of warning that only lands when spoken by somebody who means it. The courtroom became more than a place to settle a money dispute in that moment. It became a place where a young man's future was being spoken about as if it were standing at a cliff's edge. The warning carried weight because it was not theatrical. It was tired, experienced truth. Judge Judy had seen too many young people destroy themselves by insisting they were fine. She had no patience for denial, no patience for youthful arrogance dressed up as freedom. When Jonathan continued, he claimed that once outside after the party, Justin and Sean had actually invited him over to fight. He said one of them shouted from the window, "Come over and fight us." That detail mattered because it showed that even if Justin had been on the receiving end of mocking and pursuit, the energy between both sides was hostile and reckless. Nobody here was acting like a grown man. Everybody was flirting with violence. Everybody was fueled by ego. Judge Judy noticed something else important too. When Justin was testifying, Jonathan had remained relatively quiet, but when the focus returned to Justin's own behavior, Justin became more emotional, more reactive, more eager to interrupt. The judge pointed out that this loss of control was itself a sign of the problem. According to her, heavy drinking does not only damage you when alcohol is in your hand, it slowly harms your judgment, your self-control, your ability to manage yourself even when sober. That observation widened the case beyond the events of one night. Suddenly, the courtroom was not just talking about who hit whom or who owed whom. It was talking about patterns, habits, futures, the slow build of self-destruction. After a break in the courtroom flow, the case returned to the central question of what happened at Justin Sherman's house. Judge Judy framed it in the blunt, mocking way that only she could. So, she essentially said, "Jonathan, this idiot over here challenged you to a duel, and you're mature. Sophisticated response was not to go home, but instead to go over there and continue the stupidity." That sarcasm pinned Jonathan exactly where he did not want to be pinned. He wanted to sound like the calmer one, the reasonable one, the wronged one. But in driving to another man's house after a drunken party, honking his horn, demanding a confrontation, and staying in the driveway in the middle of the night, he had stepped directly into the kind of conduct that courts rarely reward. He admitted he honked. He admitted they had gone there. He admitted that the men inside did not come out. He tried to soften the story by saying he did not really want to fight, that he just wanted to settle things, maybe talk. But that claim fell apart almost as soon as he said it. Judge Judy asked the obvious question. "You thought the right time to talk was when everyone had been drinking and tempers were hot?" He tried to answer that this was the only time to talk to Justin because he usually drank. But the more he spoke, the weaker it sounded. Even if Justin was often drunk, that did not make the middle of the night after a party the right time for a conversation. It made it the worst possible time. It made it the time most likely to end in violence or damage or tragedy. Jonathan Schiller then denied backing into the car. He suggested that because he was parked in the driveway, it might have looked as if he was close, but he insisted he had not intentionally struck the vehicle. This was the key factual dispute of the case. Justin said the impact was real and deliberate. Jonathan denied it. Yet by this point in the hearing, Judge Judy had already decided something important in a broader sense. She had decided that both young men had behaved stupidly, that alcohol sat behind too much of this mess, and that neither deserved moral applause. What remained was not a question of who was admirable. It was a question of what damage had likely occurred and what amount would be fair. Then came one of the smaller but revealing moments that often define Judge Judy cases. Justin Sherman explained that his car, a 1991 Buick LeSabre, held sentimental value because it had belonged to his great-grandfather. He said that was why he wanted it repaired. There was something sincere in that statement. For a moment, the noise of the drinking, the insults, the late-night stupidity all quieted, and what remained was a young man wanting to preserve something that connected him to family and memory. But Judge Judy, being Judge Judy, did not let sentiment become inflated into an unrealistic money claim. She said she did not get sentimental over a car unless perhaps it was a vintage Rolls-Royce, and while she accepted that it should be fixed, she made clear that no one was getting $2,000 over a vehicle that was not worth that much. She told him to find somebody who could repair the damage for around $500. That moment summed up her entire approach. She was not cold to the emotional part. She understood that people attach memories to objects, but she would not let emotion erase reality. The whole car, she pointed out, was not worth the full amount being claimed. That is what a courtroom does at its best. It drags hurt feelings back toward facts. Then came the part of the case that felt less like a ruling and more like a warning from someone who had seen too much human foolishness to romanticize any of it. Judge Judy looked at both men and told them, in simple terms, that if they kept drinking and acting stupid, this was exactly what would happen. One ruined a carpet. The other hit a car. They were lucky, she said, that nobody had been killed that night because all of them had been drinking and behaving recklessly. That was the real center of the story. Not the dent. Not the carpet. Not even the old friendship gone bad. The real center was how close stupidity can come to tragedy without the people involved fully realizing it. A drunken group pushing a car toward a ditch. A vehicle following another at night, flashing lights, honking, yelling threats. Young men driving after drinking. Rage mixed with humiliation. One wrong turn, one panicked swerve, one person in the road, one tree, one oncoming car, and the story would not have ended in small claims court. It would have ended in funerals and prison sentences. That was why Judge Judy had so little sympathy. She was not unmoved by damage. She was exhausted by preventable danger. In the end, she ruled for Justin Sherman, but only in the amount of $500, far less than the $2,000 he had sought. It was enough to acknowledge that damage had occurred and that Jonathan Schiller bore responsibility, but not enough to reward exaggeration or turn an old Buick into a gold mine. That's all, she said in her final way, dismissing them. The case was over. But of course, cases like this are never really over the moment judgment is entered, because the people leave the courtroom carrying the same personalities, the same grudges, and often the same denial that brought them there. Outside the courtroom, Jonathan Schiller remained angry. He said he was outraged that he had not caused any damage to the car and that Justin was exactly the kind of person Judge Judy had described, someone with a drinking problem. His bitterness did not soften under the light of the ruling. If anything, it hardened. He sounded less like a man reflecting on his own choices and more like a man still obsessed with proving the other side worse. Justin Sherman, for his part, did not accept the judge's deeper warning either. He insisted he did not have a drinking problem, never had, never would. He pushed the problem back onto Jonathan, claiming that alcoholism ran in Jonathan's family and that Jonathan was the one without regard for society. Even then, even after standing in front of Judge Judy, neither young man seemed ready to fully own what had happened. That may have been the saddest part of all. The money dispute had been settled, but the more important lesson seemed to bounce off them. Each one still wanted the comfort of blame. Each one still wanted to stand in the safer role of the one who was wronged, not the one who was reckless. Justin said he never wanted to start a fight and only wanted Jonathan to go away. Jonathan said Justin drove home from parties and got into accidents. Their final words sounded less like truth and more like echoes of the same argument that had trapped them from the start. And that is often how youthful conflict works. Two people become so busy building their own story of innocence that they can no longer see the bigger truth standing right in front of them. The bigger truth in this story was ugly and simple. Justin Sherman had once gotten drunk, vomited on Jonathan Schiller's carpet, and refused to take proper responsibility. Jonathan Schiller, carrying that anger, allowed the grudge to live on and followed the road of taunting, confrontation, and late-night stupidity. At the party, mockery replaced maturity. On the road, recklessness replaced judgment. At the house, pride replaced sense. By the time they reached court, both wanted justice, but neither wanted the harder thing, which was self-examination. The deeper drama of the case was not whether one bumper had been struck. The deeper drama was watching two very young men stand only a few steps away from much worse consequences and still argue as if the only important thing was whose fault the last insult had been. The whole evening seemed to unfold like a warning scene from a larger tragedy that never quite happened, and maybe that was their great luck. Maybe Judge Judy's small judgment and harsh words were, in a strange way, a mercy. Better to be embarrassed in court than buried by what comes next. Better to pay $500 for a dent than spend years paying for a dead passenger, a destroyed future, or a prison sentence. Better to be called foolish by a judge than mourned by a family. In that sense, the car, the carpet, the party, the horn, the driveway, the flashing lights, and the old bitterness all came together into one loud lesson about where careless drinking and wounded ego can lead. The picture remains vivid. A shabby rural party crowded with young people and beer, two former friends watching each other from across the room, ugly faces, fake vomiting gestures, humiliation turning hot in the chest, engines starting in the cold night, headlights in the dark, a porch light glowing over a frightened or angry homecoming, a car struck in a burst of stupid rage or stupid carelessness, police called after midnight, photographs taken of damage that represented more than metal, and finally, a courtroom where Judge Judy looked through all the excuses and saw the real enemy clearly, immaturity fed by alcohol. She did not dress it up. She did not make them feel noble. She told them what too many young people do not hear early enough. This road ends badly. And perhaps that is why this case lingers in the mind. Not because the damage was huge. Not because the money was huge. But because the foolishness was so familiar, so common, so preventable. So many disasters begin with the same ingredients: a hurt ego, too much drinking, a crowd that encourages bad decisions, a refusal to back down, and the dark confidence of youth saying, nothing serious will happen. But serious things do happen. They happen every day. This time, for Justin Sherman and Jonathan Schiller, the ending was a civil judgment, some public shame, and a judge's warning. Another time, for somebody else, the ending might be a casket. That is what gives this small case its real suspense, its real emotional weight. The audience watching might laugh at the pettiness, shake their heads at the immaturity, or enjoy Judge Judy's sharp humor. But beneath all of that sits a dark truth. One more drink, one faster turn, one bigger shove, one harder impact. And this would not have been entertainment. It would have been ruin. Lesson for the listeners and viewers. When pride, anger, and alcohol come together, even a small grudge can become dangerous very fast. Take responsibility early, walk away from foolish fights, and never let one reckless night decide the rest of your life.